Hi writers, readers, and gamers, I'm Christy Stratus, and today we're back with MCGEE'S Alice. And today's topic is going to be negative reviews, whether you are leaving a negative review, considering leaving a negative review, or whether you've gotten a negative review on your own book. So first I'm going to talk about leaving negative reviews, because that applies to everyone, whether you're an indie author or just a reader, and then I'm going to go into if you've gotten a negative review on your own book. First of all, leaving reviews. Okay, this is one of those things where everybody does their own thing, does it differently, has a strong opinion. So some people actually say that if you are going to leave anything under 5 stars for an indie author, you should not leave that review. So I disagree with that. I think 4 or 5 stars is fine. I don't think 4 is a big deal. So for me, actually, it's 3 stars or less. I'm going to consider whether I should be doing that. One thing that I think is really, really important is whether this is an indie author with very few reviews or whether this is a traditionally published author with a huge amount of reviews. And the difference is that if you leave a 3-star review or lower for an indie author, that's going to drag their rating down to a point where it's going to be really difficult for them to get it back up. And I didn't really understand this until I was an indie author myself. When you're an indie author, whether that means you're published by a small indie company or if you're self-published, doesn't really matter. The whole thing of it is that you might have 1 review, you might have 17, you might have 50, but what happens is when you get something lower than 5 stars, it lowers your review by a lot, especially if it's 3 stars or lower. That rating can get dragged down much, much faster than it can be pulled back up. So that's what I discovered, and I did not realize before I was an author myself. That makes me always think twice. If this book has been gifted to me, for example, from an indie author, then I'm going to consider asking them. I can only give your book this many stars. I don't know if you really want me to do that. Please let me know. Now, there are going to be some people out there who say they're an author and they put a book out there and they get whatever review they get, and that's fine. But to me, I'm going to ask that person because I would really appreciate it if somebody said to me, hey, I really didn't like your book. I would have to give it 1 star if I left a review, but I don't have to leave that review. It's totally up to you. Now, I know there are some very strong opinions out there about that, so definitely feel free to comment with your opinion of what you would do. But, let's face facts, best-selling, traditionally published authors, when you leave a 1-star review, it doesn't touch their rating at all. Like, you don't even see it go down, so it's not that big of a deal. So I'm more likely to just share whatever review I have, whether it's really bad or really good, for a best-selling, traditionally published author that already has 363 reviews than an indie author that has 2. Like I said, let me know your opinion down below. I'm perfectly happy to hear dissenting opinions. My advice is if you're an author, you know how it feels when you see that rating drop because of 1 review and it takes so long to get it back up to where it was or even close to it. Another thing that I just want to say to make sure when you're leaving a review, if you've got a negative review, make sure that you're not reviewing based on the genre. This is something that happens every once in a while where somebody is like, oh, well, I hate vampire books and this book was terrible because it had vampires. Well, personally, I would not review that book because I know that I don't like the genre or I don't like the idea behind it to begin with. So to me, it's not really fair to rate it. I already knew that this was not something I was going to like. But another example of that, this one time I read something that was military science fiction, way outside the norm of what I usually read. I'm not the hugest fan of science fiction. It completely depends on how deep it goes into the science of it all and stuff like that. The whole military aspect, I wasn't really sure whether I would like, so I gave it a shot. I read it, and I really didn't like it. But I thought to myself, well, is it really the writing or is it the genre? And the thing was, I hadn't really read that genre before. I didn't know much about it. And since I didn't like the book even a little bit, I thought maybe it really has more to do with the genre than the book itself. So I decided that I was going to hold off on that review until I had read something else from that genre. And you know what? I found myself really not wanting to read that genre again and sort of avoiding doing it. So I decided I wasn't going to leave a review on that book because it was clearly the genre that turned me off. So that's something else to consider. Again, there are going to be people who say it doesn't matter, leave your review. It's totally up to you. I'm just sharing my personal opinion and my practices. If you do want to leave a negative review for somebody that is not somebody with 1,000 reviews already, where it's really going to impact their star rating, the one thing I would say is make sure that your review has substance that's useful to the author, especially a self-published indie author. One thing that I'm going to talk about in a minute for people who have written their own book and they're reading their own reviews and they're having a hard time dealing with negative reviews, they're looking for what your feedback is. And if it really has some substance to it, if you're really giving them feedback that's helpful, I'm not saying you have to write like a huge response, a huge review saying, here are all the details of what I liked and didn't like. But what I am saying is that if you can say specifically, like, I really felt the character development was very superficial, that's extremely extremely helpful. And that author can go back and say, let me look at that and specifically really look at that and see if I agree. Or if they see that multiple times, then that's something that they may want to fix. That's really helpful. If you're finding a lot of proofreading errors, that's something that you may or may not want to mention. It's something that could be helpful. If you're leaving a review that has some kind of substance to it and says very specifically what you didn't like, that can actually help the author out a lot. So if you really insist on leaving a bad review for an indie author, just try not to leave like one sentence that says, I didn't like this book, because your opinion actually does count and it does matter to us. And it's really, really helpful. So, it's not like some big, huge, enormous author, like I said, that has 1,000 stars and isn't even going to bother looking at your review. We are going to look at your review and we're going to read it and we're going to, try to improve our writing in the future based on it, maybe depending on that author. So that's going to lead me right into reading your own negative reviews if you are an indie author. This can be really painful. I mean, especially when you're first published, when your first book comes out and you see even something like 3 stars, your heart like drops a little bit and you're like, well, what didn't you like about it? It does upset you. It's just the way it is. It's our own work. It's a little bit painful. This is something we put our heart and soul into and we loved so much and we felt was ready to go out, and then you see something subpar or just not what you wanted to see, and it's disappointing. And that's totally natural, totally normal, nothing to be upset with yourself about. It's okay to feel that disappointment. The biggest thing to remember is not to take all negative reviews to heart. That's the first thing to remember, okay? You need to really look at the actual review and see what it says, and if it has, like I said before, substance. If it's something, I'll go into more detail in just a second, but just don't take it immediately to heart. Now I'm going to tell you why. Look at the amount of effort that was put into the review. Like I said before, if it's something where the person just says, I didn't like this book, and that's it, or like one sentence, or something really hateful or mean, I've seen that kind of thing before, that's something you may not really want to look at, because clearly the person didn't put the effort in, or the person just didn't care that much, or they didn't think too much about it, or they're just angry for some reason. Who knows why? We don't know what's going on in a person's life that might make them do this. Consider the amount of effort that was put into it. Now, if it does have a lot of substance, if they did say something specific like character development, then that's something that you may want to look at. And if it's something that you were insecure about to begin with, if you were looking at your book and saying, I wonder if this character is just a little bit too superficial, I wonder if I didn't develop them enough, I wonder if they just pop up too suddenly and we don't have enough background, anything like that, then if it's something you were insecure about to begin with, that's when you may want to think about it and say, I wonder if I could actually improve that. If it's something logical or useful, then that's something you may want to consider. But again, it's completely up to you. If you look at that comment and you say, I worked really hard on that aspect of the book, I don't personally agree, you could either just totally ignore it, you could ask someone who you trust to tell you the truth about it and say, I saw this review, what do you think? And if they're completely honest and they tell you, yes, I agree with that, or no, I don't, that could really help. So, but again, everyone has different opinions. Someone can read a book and absolutely hate it, think it's garbage, think it took no thought to put together, it was a stupid book, it's pointless, anything like that. And the next person can read it and be like, wow, this is the most brilliant thing ever, it changed my life, I can't get over it. It's just a matter of how each person reads it, what place they are in their life, stuff like that. So another thing that you could do though, if you see a 3-star review and it doesn't really say much, or it just says, I enjoyed this book, and it upsets you for some reason that they left 3 stars instead of 4, one thing you might want to do is look at the other reviews that were left by that person. I'm not saying that you have to spend an hour looking at all the reviews, but just take a general overview of what kind of reviews and star ratings they've left before, because for some people, 3 stars is actually a really good rating. They're considering that as much as Amazon sets out some, like 3 stars is good, or 4 stars is great, or however they do it, I can't remember off the top of my head, they have specific words that go with each star rating, then that's supposed to be the standard. That's what they want to be the standard. But people have their own standards as well. And so 3 might mean that they really enjoyed it, but it wasn't something life-changing. 3 might to somebody else mean it was average, and 3 to somebody else might mean, I don't care. It's really, really subjective. It's very different for everybody, even though Amazon is saying, here's what these stars mean. Especially when you go onto a different platform to leave those stars and they don't actually tell you what each star rating means. I don't know. People just make up sort of whatever makes sense in their head. So that's another thing to consider. If you see that person leaves a lot of 1-star reviews and they left you a 3-star review, well, that's pretty good. That's a great thing. So that's something else that you want to consider. But my final thing that I want to say is that if you as an author see that somebody left a proofreading comment, they say, I found a couple of mistakes. This actually happened to me. I'll share my experience with Anatomy of a Darkened Heart. There was someone who left a review on Goodreads, and they said something about one of the dates being out of order, and that confused them, and they weren't really sure what the deal was with that. Was it supposed to go backwards, or was it a mistake? And actually, it was a mistake. Once you look at those dates, to many times and you change them over and over, it's easy enough to make this mistake. Things get through. This happens in huge books published by major traditional publishers as well. I've definitely found even basic proofreading mistakes in those books, so it's not just a matter of it being indie published or self-published or anything, but if you see a proofreading comment like that, what I did was I thanked the person. That was actually really helpful. I would hate for the book to stay out there that way, so I made the correction to all the versions right away, and then I thanked the person. I don't usually comment on reviews. That, again, is something that's up to you. Some people believe you should comment on every single review, thanking them no matter if it's a 1-star or a 5-star. Some people believe don't get mixed up in the reviews, just let them be whatever they are. And I can't say that I comment on most reviews. I leave them alone. But if there's something that's extremely helpful like that, like a proofreading one, then I did actually leave a comment and say, thank you so much for letting me know. I did resolve this issue, so thanks for helping me improve my book, basically. So those are some things to think about when you're about to leave a negative review or when you read your own negative review as an author. And I really hope that these things that I've said today support you, they help you, they encourage you, and maybe they help you make sense out of the whole review process, which is really to each his own. Everybody does a whole different thing and every author considers it very differently. So I hope that this was helpful to you. Please feel free to leave any comments down below, whether you disagree or you agree. Thank you so much for spending time with me. I'll see you next week.